welcome to this informal conversational session, which is going to be around 30 minutes long. And we are looking at the future of wellbeing and mental health in the light of providing long-term support for your people. We know that COVID-19 has had a massive impact on the mental health of our people, and we need to help them adapt to their working lives as they develop. It's had a profound impact, and this session is for you if you want to enhance wellbeing and mental health at your organisation and provide exceptional support for your people as they process and recover from the impacts of the pandemic. We're looking at managing the pace and magnitude of change, building resilience and coping with stress, cultivating a mindset of opportunity, planning for an uncertain future, and transitioning back to work into whatever this new normal looks like, managing our energy and physical well-being, and working flexibly to support your employees' well-being and our own. My name is Heather Beach, and I'm the Managing Director and founder of a business called The Healthy Work Company. We provide training and strategy support to organisations in managing health at work. So we work with organisations such as ITV, Luton Airport and Mace to do that. And I'm really delighted to introduce to you very briefly our wonderful panel here today, which is a great cross-section, and we're going to have a really interesting debate. So first of all, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Jummy Okoya from the University of East London. She's an accomplished multi-sector diversity and inclusion, leadership and organisational development consultant with more than 2 decades experience, and also delighted to see that she's an expert on positive psychology, which is a particular interest of mine. We also have Philip McCrea here. He is the Chief Medical Officer to the Birmingham Hospital Saturday Fund, BHSF. He's an occupational health physician with 38 years experience of specialising in the field of mental health. Then we have Bethany Kimberley. Bethany has a degree in psychology, CIPD qualifications, and more importantly, practical experience as a Remploy consultant. She's the National Partnership Manager for Remploy, who are one of the UK's leading disability employment specialists. Then finally, and last but not least, we have Dr. Anshumen Bhagat. And Dr. Anshumen is he's a GP for the NHS. He's also the CMO, the Chief Medical Officer of GDPQ, a nationwide organisation. He's also an ex-commissioner for mental health services in the North London CCG. Right, so without further ado, I'm going to ask the first of our long list of questions. So Dr. Anshumen, let's start with you. Where are we now, and why do the issues of well-being and mental health matter so much? Why are we talking about well-being as the most important item on the agenda for the coming year? What's your views on that one?
So thank you, Heather. I think, sorry, I know you asked me where are we now. I just want to reflect a little bit on where we were, and I think it often gives us a better idea of where we are now, because I think mental health and well-being is something that we've talked about for many, many years, and I think the environment pre-COVID, I think if we can just split sort of past and present a little bit in terms of where we were pre-COVID, I think life was just too busy. I think, you know, employers, and I'm an employer myself, but also I think it's trying to find the time within an organisation when everything's pretty full pelt to try and incorporate what I call true well-being into the workplace. Where we are now is, and I start to see, you know, whilst, you know, everything in COVID has really rained all sorts of negativity upon us all, I think we've got to start to look at some of the opportunities of what it has allowed us to do. And that's the sort of element of how do we start to focus on the things that we just didn't have time to focus on? And this is not just as me as an employee or a clinician or even as an employer. We've all had time to sit back. We've all had time to think a little bit in terms of, well, what's going on. And a lot of these things can stem from fear, uncertainty, and not just uncertainty from a clinical perspective, but certainly uncertainty from future job prospects, pay, how am I going to pay my mortgage, and all of these different challenges that we're all currently facing. I think employers have really had a great opportunity now to start to really look at what well-being looks like in reality, and how do you start to implement it when there's very few people at work. And that's the kind of sort of biggest challenge, really. And I appreciate people are starting to go back. But I think it's time to start to focus on the real time things that we can start to implement, because, you know, we still have a good 50–60% of the working population that are working from home, and quite frankly doing it quite well. So a lot of employers, certainly, if we start to look at some of our sort of central London partners that we supply our services to, they own huge buildings in Canary Wharf, and they're 20% full. So we know that the rest of the workforce is going to start to need some form of input, but not in your sort of traditional way. So this is where we start to look at how can we reach out to our population at home. I think well-being isn't just about sort of offering services to your employee. I think it's also really about what other things make people unwell, in a sense. So whether it be family, whether it be childcare, whether it be holiday vouchers, whether it be counselling, whether it be school support, teaching support, exercise, fitness. One of the things, interestingly, we started to look at was that when schools went off, you can start to imagine that you've got everybody at home, you've got your kids at home, and everybody's eating the house out of food at a rapid rate, and no one's kind of doing any exercise. And so, how did we sort of, one of the big things that we started to look at was how can we offer employees and our staff exercise regimes for your children, with your children. So I think once you have healthy children, I think it certainly passes on to parents, that you start to feel a little bit better about yourself as well.
Thank you, Anshu. I think that's so interesting, because I think one of the challenges that we have as organisations is understanding what our employees are actually struggling with and how we support them in order to support their well-being. I mean, I was on a webinar, I believe it was only yesterday, and somebody said, we normally provide fruit on a Friday, how can we replicate that? I actually nearly tore my hair out at that point. But that is the kind of thing that we have seen in the past, a bunch of initiatives which just make the organisation feel a bit better. And now we have an opportunity to do something more systemic, don't we? Philip, what do you think about that? How can we find the right approach for our employees within our organisations that's going to make the biggest difference?
Well, thank you, Heather. As an occupational health physician, I'm obviously dealing in the front line with people who are experiencing mental health issues, which is a very good benchmark of a lack of well-being. And just with Anshu's comments, where were we before the pandemic? 40% of all absenteeism was as a consequence of mental health problems. And I joined a very good World Health Organization webinar at the start of this pandemic, where they predicted that absenteeism or mental health issues would affect 70% of the workforce. So there is a real fear that we're sitting on a potential epidemic. And the question is, why should that be? Well, we've sort of solved one problem and created a number of others. I'm coming across a lot of people with pre-existing mental health conditions that have been exacerbated by the isolation, loneliness and restriction that the pandemic has created. But I'm also dealing with people who are developing mental health problems because of the pandemic, the fear of going back to work, the fear of being at risk of contracting the virus, the fear of death. So that's a real new issue on the mental health arena. And also some people who don't have mental health problems, but who struggle with the isolation. And it's all very well if you live at a nice house with a garden, but if you're in an apartment in central London with 4 other people in a tiny space, that can have a significant impact on your mental health. And I'm sure, Anshu, you would agree with that. And then finally, because we have had this opportunity to place colleagues on furlough, in our organisation, we particularly chose parents with young children, parents with caring responsibilities. We absolutely deliberately chose them to be on furlough so that they can continue to work at home or continue to be at home. And we have paid all our employees full pay from day one right to the end of October, because we think that's the right thing to do. But even with that support, we now have coined a condition called furlough fear, where people who are off work think the longer they're off work, the organisation can do without them. They're not needed anymore. And it's created this fear of redundancy, fear of deconditioning, fear of inability to return. So I think we've got real issues. And I think that's the negative. The positive, I would say, is employers now have an opportunity to draw a line in the sand and start new ideas to support their staff. What we've done in this period is we have had a very active communication program with our staff. I'm a manager, I manage a team. I've had a weekly call with all of my furlough employees for 15, 20 minutes on non-work issues, just how they're doing, what they need, what can we support them with. We have encouraged them all to do training, so to keep up their skills and competence. We've created some intranet fun channels where they can participate. We've a Ready Steady Cook channel, we've a games channel, like Anshu, we've an exercise competition channel where people can input. We've created that community of being together in this, if that makes sense. But I think when employers come back to work, there's an opportunity to redraw the boundaries.
100%. And what is interesting, I think, about this period is that it's really encouraged a culture of experimentation, hasn't it? Which is actually great to see. It's really good to see how best practice is coming out of what people are just trying to see what works. So building on that then, can I ask you, Beth, what has your organisation's response been to these past few months, and how everything that you've experienced, seen and heard is shaping your future strategy?
Yes, definitely. So as Philip and Anshu said they've put lots of different things in place to support their colleagues, but our biggest challenge was at the very start. We had to change our whole delivery model. So over the last since March 2020, we've delivered all of our services virtually. So previously we'd offer 9 months vocational mental health support that would usually include 3 face-to-face meetings at the start, at the middle, at the end of the journey. But we haven't been able to do that, of course. So we've had to adapt to the virtual way of working. And I think a lot of people would assume that when it comes to mental health, people are more keen to have that face-to-face engagement. People are often on long waiting lists for clinical mental health support and counselling. But we recently did a survey to the customers that we've supported during this time, and people that we'd also previously supported, say from January. And 88% of those came back and said to us that they've actually found that virtual support is just as adequate as that face-to-face support. So I think moving forward, one of the things that we're going to try and do is we're a DWP funded contract to offer that vocational support. So it's fully funded. It's not something employers have to pay for. So we're going to be engaging with them as our main partner to kind of say, actually, could we give people more of a choice? It doesn't have to be a face-to-face service. It could just be that virtual service. So I think that'll be a conversation that we're having, because it is easy to make the assumption that face-to-face is better, but actually people are reporting that they're preferring that virtual service. And as well, to expand on what's been said so far, it is easy when you think of workplace wellness to only think of the workplace triggers, but actually all of, not all of, but many of the people that we're supporting are experiencing those external triggers. And just because we offer vocational support to them, it doesn't mean that it's got to be caused by the vocational setting itself. It could be caused by things external, such as those new caring responsibilities, and perhaps new debt problems and things like that have come from the current circumstances. So it's important to know that the services that are out there, such as ours, it doesn't have to be caused by the workplace. It can be external, and it's making sure that's kept in mind, and it's not all about that workplace setting.
Thank you. That are really important ones to remember, because as employers, we pick up the problem, whether it's related to home or related to work, don't we? And that has kind of passed us by in prior years, I think. Philip, you wanted to speak about that as well.
Yes, Heather, I just wanted to add to what Bethany said. We're a national provider of occupational services, and until the 24th of March, we were running 10 face-to-face clinics across the UK and Ireland. And in a 32-hour period, we had to move to remote business. And we have now carried out over 5,000 virtual consultations by phone or video. And I can report 0 complaints from the employee as a user experience. In fact, quite a positive, but also from the customer. And what we've been able to do is offer appointments within 24 hours. So we're getting people really early and getting them sorted out and treated a lot earlier than we used to with a face-to-face component. So in some respects, the pandemic has offered the opportunity to improve the well-being opportunity for our customers' employees.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that, isn't it? As trainers, we were very committed to face-to-face training. And what we found is that actually we can do it just as well virtually. My daughter that needed mental health support in the period, I found so many therapists that weren't prepared to treat her online. And then I've got one, he's brilliant, and it's just making such a difference so quickly. We would have been on a waiting list to see someone physically for probably months. So there are definite benefits. Can I move on to asking you a question, Jummy? So I think that as Anshu's pointed out, as other panelists have pointed out, we've got quite an opportunity here now, haven't we? Although we are operating in a difficult, uncertain environment, for as long as we've been running our business, every survey that we've done with every organisation, people have said flexible working would make a big difference to their well-being. Can you speak to that point? Can you explain why flexible working makes a difference, what the opportunity is that we could grasp here? Thank you.
I think I'll start by sharing a very relevant research that was done by an organisation called Engaging Works. And this research was done between March and May this year. So one was done in March and the follow-up was done in May. So just before the lockdown, they carried out a research about asking managers and middle managers and lower level employees about how much they want to have a say in terms of the flexibility of their work. And more than 75% reported that having flexible working creates a sense of meaning and a sense of control over, how they determine how they work, and also the impact it has on their personal life and their professional life. Now, flexibility, how that reflect with employees, it gives them a sense of flourishing, and the flexibility allows them to take control and to be able to integrate what they do outside of work with work. So, we talk about work-life balance, but the conversation has gone beyond work-life balance. It's now work-life integration, understanding that the two overlaps. And when employers give employees that freedom of choice to allow both to actually be congruent, what we find is that employees enjoy that sense of control. They experience flourishing, but also there's something called PERMA, which is about positive emotion, engagement of employees. People are more engaged when there is that sense of flexibility in what they do. It creates that sense of meaning when they're able to, spend time with their family and have time to still work. So, bringing that integration of both, those two are very important, what we do in our personal time and how we have the flexibility to craft how we work. This allows, employees to be engaged and, that locus of control, element of feeling like I have a say in how I work. And even, after the lockdown, people were surveyed again to say, how many of you are looking forward to, over 1,000 employees were surveyed, are looking forward to going back. And more than 72% are saying, I want some form of, working from home. So that flexibility of maybe coming in 2 days a week and working the remaining 3 days from work, or however it's going to work. So flexibility, that flexible working that allows people to, pay attention to those things that brings meaning to their life and that sense of purpose, depending on where you are in terms of, your life, and your career. Meaning is something that has that layer of fulfillment to employees that then increases productivity. And all of these, contribute to the bottom line for the organization. So it is in the employer's best interest to encourage that flexibility and support it, but also for the employee, because when there is that flexibility, work-life integration works well, and flexible working, then it's a win-win for both parties.
Oh, Jimmy, you're so speaking my language, honestly. But what is interesting, I think, about this situation, and I think Anshu pointed to it earlier, is we've always got this law of unintended consequences, haven't we? In that, yes, there's so much that's positive about all of this. However, what we're finding is that we've got people sat at home who don't know when to stop, who are struggling with workload. They are sitting in back-to-back Zoom meetings all day. And as a self-employed person, I think I probably take a little bit more ownership over my diary than when I was employed. I want to ask you, Philip, actually here, what should employers be doing to empower individuals to take ownership over their time management, to maintain their well-being? You know, how do we feel that sense that actually I do own my time? How do we manage that when we're working remotely, and overcome the challenge of working too hard, sitting in back-to-back virtual meetings? I'm going to come to you first, Philip, and then to you, Anshu, on this one.
Thank you, Heather. Absolutely. As I said earlier, this is now an opportunity for employers to redraw the boundaries of the way they interact and engage with employees. Personally, myself, I now no longer have 17 hours a week commute. And what's happened is that 17 hours has been filled with work. So I'm probably working harder than I did when I was actually at work, if that makes sense. And I think what employees need to do, they need to, at the senior level, start to value the health and well-being of their employees as an asset rather than a resource. And in so doing, they need to consider all of their policies and procedures to start incorporating the new normal. And they need to provide the staff with the opportunities to improve their own physical and mental health. Andrew mentioned exercise, but there are a number of other things they can do. Salary sacrifice, flexible pay and retention, annual leave buyback, volunteering, fundraising. There is a lot of activities that employees can be supported with by giving them time to do. I think managers need to be trained to recognize compassionately and effectively the resource they have and to utilize it, and to sort of act as a sort of buddy and mentor to make sure that people are not working ridiculous hours and not taking breaks, regular breaks. Our company, for example, I sit on the senior executive team, we have all day meetings, but we factor in significant breaks during the meeting where people are advised to go and exercise and do something differently. I think engendering a culture where we respect diversity, transferable skills and experience is important. I think this is an opportunity for employers to sit down, throw out the old and start with the new, but the health and well-being of their employees is point number one.
Anshu, can I come to you on that point? I mean, it feels to me that what stops people in this area is fear. So fear of, if I'm not seen to be at my desk producing all day, how will I actually be recognised? How will my work be recognised? Would you agree with that? Or do you think there's another way to look at this?
Look, I would. And I think, look, Philip mentioned something about absenteeism. 40% absenteeism is huge. Now, interestingly, the converse to this is presenteeism, where what you've got is people sitting at work in this exact environment, not happy, not healthy in a mental capacity, not enjoying what they're doing. And it's a slow burn. It really is. And it's this, we've got to start to look at how do we start to address some of the things where, I'd rather a person stay at home and find that you manage your diary better, you manage your family better. It's really interesting. I mean, Jimmy, you mentioned something about sort of, gosh, if I look back to pre-COVID in meetings, how are you was never really kind of a question that would come up. We're in a meeting, it's all very formal, we're very face-to-face. No one's really asking, how are you, how are your family, how are your children? It's interesting how now through this technology, whilst you're waiting for 10 people to come on a call, I was on one yesterday, and I was, suddenly you've got your daughter running behind you, and you're talking about, well, what's your daughter doing? How's your dog? How's your cat? Are you going on holiday? We can all moan about the weather, but actually, it's just something that we're talking about our lives, because I think we forget that we are people, and that's the really important bit. Julie mentioned one thing about ownership and giving people the power to make certain decisions and giving them responsibility to control what they do in terms of home and work life, and how they are so intertwined. I think this is a really valuable piece here. I think we've got to start to understand we are all people, whether you're the manager, whether you're the CEO, or whether you're an employee further down. So at the end of the day, we are all on one rack. We all have families. We all have other things to do apart from work, and those other things are often the most important things that interact with our job. Those are the things that we've got to get that interaction right with.
I think that's absolutely the case, and it's interesting, isn't it? We're all now trying to plan and gain some sense of influence, and we've got a rapidly shifting, uncertain landscape and future, haven't we? We were on this hamster wheel before. We knew what happened every single day, and we got on the train, and then we did this, and then we did that, and then we did the other, and now we're in this kind of sense of, whoa, this is all new, this is all different, and that can be really scary, but also it's a massive opportunity, isn't it? But as employees, we're not necessarily used to having to exercise that level of resilience, are we? So I'm going to start with you on this one, Jummy, and then I'm going to go to Beth after that. How can employers best support their people to become more resilient so they can potentially see this in a positive light and create positive opportunities from this time?
I think in terms of employers supporting their employees to be more resilient is giving people the permission to not be okay, to actually allow people to demonstrate that this is what I choose to focus on. This is how I'm feeling right now, and this is what I'm going to prioritize. And also having that this again goes back to flexibility. Now, when employers understand that not only are people, contributing to the bottom line, but also when employees flourish and they are in a position where, they have control of, they have that power of choice of, things that fuel their passion, things that make them feel fulfilled, they're more able and in a place to contribute. And, if we go to the very basic, what is resilience? Resilience is just, being able to, bounce back by using resources. And where those resources come from? These are either external resources or internal resources. Employers need to create that environment that allows their employees to actually feel that they're supported. The environment where they're working offers those resources for them, an open environment, an environment where there's psychological safety, where it's okay to, share some things with your leaders, and leaders also role modeling, resilience themselves. So employers have a big role to play in terms of creating an environment that allows their employees to do the best work that they're able to contribute. So internal resources and external resources, but where the employer comes in is creating an environment that allows the employees to flourish.
Before I move on, actually, I'd just like to pick you up on one thing. I love this word, psychological safety, and we found that a lot of organisations have never heard of it, but it's so critical. Could you just explain what you mean by psychological safety, please?
So psychological safety is an idea of where, leaders or employers create an environment where it is okay not to be right all the time. And it allows for vulnerability. So I can make mistake without anyone blaming me, without actually, seeing a mistake as an opportunity for learning, but also more about sharing, things that you feel comfortable sharing, and, bringing your vulnerability to work, and, actually letting people know this is going on for me. That is if you feel okay to share it, because more of our vulnerability that we share with, colleagues, it allows them a peek into our world and get to know us a bit more, and then create that connection that is beyond superficial connection.
And it creates trust, doesn't it? Which is something
trust.
that you,
Absolutely.
yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much. So Beth, how can employers best support their people to become more resilient? What's your take on this?
Yes, I mean, we've spoken a lot about control and how that links with resilience. And I think as the culture changes and the narrative around it changes, and we're going to be giving more control to employees over time. I think as a company that supports a lot of people with health conditions and disabilities, it's important that whatever external, internal resources that you've got and that you advertise and that you partner with, that you are approaching people that may need it specifically. So making sure that you've got that matrix or that triage process in place in order to identify who may benefit from which service, because it can be overwhelming being presented with a multitude of wellbeing resources, which I'm sure are all great in their own way, but it's about approaching people with the appropriate ones for them. And I think it was mentioned earlier, people are on furlough and they're worrying about the safety of their job, and perhaps worrying about having those conversations with their employer about their support needs, because they don't want to be seen as somebody that could be disposable to the business because of their capacity to cope. And it's one of the biggest things we do at Remploy. So when someone's on our 9-month program and we're helping them to overcome workplace related obstacles, a big part of what we do is helping them to have the conversations with the employer, so those challenging conversations. So I mean, the biggest advice I could give to HR professionals and things listening onto this is to approach those individuals that perhaps may be a little bit more vulnerable, and presenting them with the support service which you feel is the best fit for them, and kind of not taking the decision out of their hands, but kind of guiding them through that decision.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant. And that brings me on beautifully to the next question. It was almost like you set it up that way. So what I'd like to ask is, and I'm going to start with you on this one, Philip. How can we equip and empower teams to remove the taboo around wellbeing? Beth referred to it earlier. People are still concerned about saying, I'm struggling, because that might mean that their job might be in peril. What should all companies be doing as a minimum to make sure that it's safe for people to engage in these honest and meaningful conversations?
Thank you, Heather. And yes, I agree with both Jummy and with Anshu that we have got to create an environment where it's okay to not be okay. And the problem around mental health is that some of the core symptoms of, for example, depression is guilt, shame, embarrassment, and even denial. So those are precisely the things that stop people coming forward. And I think what employers, and I like to keep it simple. I'm a medical professional, but I don't think this is a societal issue. I think, you need to create those relationships where people feel confident about talking to you. What I do with my own team, I have a team of 10. We have a weekly call for an hour, and we're not allowed to talk about work. So we have a coffee. Everybody must share a recipe, and they must go and cook it and bring it back the next week and talk about it. Everybody has to talk about a TV program that they enjoyed, and everybody has to tell something that amused them. So we create that culture in a small team where you have, it's very informal. We're using the technology to be very sociable together, and also to make everybody aware that we're a group together, and people start to share their concerns and fears, and it opens it up. And I think creating that informality and, having a bit more fun at work. We spend 35% of our life at work. Let's make it more fun, and let's use the calamitous pandemic we've had as an opportunity to make work more enjoyable, and to allow it to engage in your social environment, so that if you're not okay, you feel okay about saying, I'm not okay.
Thank you, Philip. I'm going to come to you, Jummy, on that one. What was your point?
I'm going to start by saying, Philip, I agree with all of what you said about, and having that informal environment and encouraging people to share, personal stories, cooking, and, having informal, chat. There's something called pecha culture, which we do within our team, which is, chit chat in Japanese, encouraging people to talk about things they do outside of work, so that other, colleagues within the team understand what makes you tick as a person, outside of work, and create that sense of, deep connection, within teams. But I think, again, leaders have an important role to play here in terms of role modeling and creating, again, the environment of psychological safety, because when there is psychological safety, people feel more confident, or, they feel less of fear of sharing, how, the taboo around, well-being is broken. When, leaders themselves can actually talk about, how they're struggling, either whether with their mental health or either the personal health or other issues. So creating that environment of sharing and, open, authentic conversation is important. And again, to the point that Philip made about, that informal setting and environment that encourage people to talk about other things that matter to them in their life.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to finally come to our last question. I'm going to ask you, Anshu, first. What's the most powerful action, strategy, or tool that you've come across that can make the biggest difference to the well-being of teams?
Gosh, thank you. And I think, it's an interesting one. I'm in a unique position because I'm an NHS GP, but I'm also in the private sector. And what I am seeing is the differences in, we talk about what we're going to do and how we should do it. But but the reality of how often comes down to the raw fact of funding. And I hate to keep on bringing this up, but unfortunately it is one of those sort of sticklers as an ex-commissioner that you soon find that, you know, if we're talking about mental health support, for example, and we're not talking above and beyond going to see your GP, you know, you need to really kind of get to speak to a psychological practitioner or a psychotherapist. Now, the waiting times are just are too long. You know, they are too long, and I don't want to come across all negative. And one of the positives that I'm starting to see in the private sector, one thing that we do nationwide is we support companies right the way through from GP services on site, telemedicine services, right the way through to occupational health services and everything in between. So we now have virtual psychotherapy, virtual exercise classes, virtual physiotherapy. Now, there's no way that that I totally agree that the public sector is going to struggle to deliver this. So the challenge for me, and I don't like to bring things down to money, but I think every sector needs to think what they can do. And going back to some of the things that sort of Jummy was mentioning is, you know, this stuff doesn't need to cost huge amounts of money. You know, even the concept of having, for example, things like the chit chat, I think it makes you far more closer and personal and more tolerant to somebody that you work with. You know, if I know nothing about somebody, I'm going to be quite dismissive should that be needed. But if you know them and you know their children's names, you know what their hobbies are, you're much more sympathetic in that sense. So I think we've got to start to do things in a small way. I think breaking taboo would be my first thing. And I know Jimmy mentioned this, was that, gosh, I've spent the last 15 years trying to understand and talk about taboo. And, you know, for example, if I break my arm and I come to work, you know, everybody will ask me, how did you break your arm? Tell me about it. Oh, I was skiing. Fantastic. Can I sign your cast? Brilliant. Look, we've all had a lovely discussion about my holiday as well. If I come in with something that's in my head that I'm not happy with, nobody really wants to know. You know, it's not, oh gosh, tell me about why you're sad. Well, you know, not many people kind of really want to engage in that, partly because not that they're not interested, they probably don't know what to do. So I think educating the workforce around sort of making sure that everybody knows what mental health is, because we all suffer from it, I can tell you that. You know, I would probably say 70 to 80% of all of my consultations, and I'm in surgery every single day, consist of a form of mental health. So unless we're educated on this, and it's education en masse for workforces, to start to talk about these are the signs, these are the symptoms, and you all suffer from them. And we've just kind of really kind of sort of get to a place where, well, actually, now we've had that discussion, what can we start to do? Start to ask your employees as well, what do they want? I think it's a really important part.
I'm going to stop you there, but thank you so much, Anshu. I'm going to just ask Jummy to have the very last word. If she can do that in 1 minute, that will be delightful. Jummy.
Okay, I'm just going to build on what Dr. Anshu has already said, you know, just to say that some practical tools that people could use to manage, to actually break the taboo and manage their own well-being, what employers can do. I've used a tool recently. You know, I work with organizations around, you know, well-being and resilience, and using this tool to actually take the temperature of, you know, get an audit of how a team is doing in terms of their well-being. So it's called the Workplace Resilience and Well-being Tool. It's raw. And that tool actually gives you a quick snapshot of how your, you know, team members are doing in terms of their energy level, future focus, inner drive, in terms of their flexible thinking and connection within the team. It gives you a percentage for each of those pillars and also recommend ways to enhance and improve that without, you know, naming, you know, a particular person is low on energy, but it gives you like an overview for the entire group. It then, you know, allows you as a leader to take informed decision on how you're going to work on each of those. But using practical tools to support your team is definitely one way to support well-being and encourage, you know, speaking about it and taking, you know, very positive, pragmatic actions.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Flexpo, to you, Ursula, for extending the invitation to these brilliant panelists here today. I think it's been such a great discussion. In just half an hour, we've covered so much. Thank you, Philip, Bethany, Anshu, and Jummy. And I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.
everyone. I am Katie. I'm joined by my colleague Laura, and we'll be taking you through a case study of how hiring diverse leaders at TfL is helping to champion flexible working. So together we'll be covering a brief introduction to ourselves and our teams, some recent research to set the scene around mental health and wellbeing in the workplace, what this means for us at TfL, a wellbeing initiative introduced for our employees and customers. We'll then move on to our team's success and sharing what we've been doing around diverse hiring. And I'll hand over to Laura to talk you through a recent flexible working initiative that she introduced. We'll then finish with a couple of our top tips. So I'm Katie. As I mentioned, I work in the talent acquisition and executive recruitment team at Transport for London as a talent acquisition manager, focused on leadership hiring. I've been at TfL for about 6 years now, nearly 6 years, and have been in this team for 3 years. Before that, I worked in organisational change and the recruitment team. And then before that, I worked in recruitment agencies for a number of boutique recruitment companies. Our current team is part of a wider diversity, inclusion and talent function, which is headed up by Saint & Brown, our director. And our team's mission is to hire the diverse top leadership talent for TfL. So we thought it'd be briefly helpful to go through a recent report that Deloitte published around mental health and wellbeing in the workplace, that published that a sixth of workers experience a mental health problem at any one time, and stress, anxiety and depression are thought to be responsible for half of working days lost in Britain due to ill health. For TfL, this is around 4,500 employees, and I've been one of those employees once, and I'm sure you guys have listening today, where I felt really not great and might have called in sick with sickness or a headache, and actually that the reality was I felt too stressed or anxious to go to work that day. But I'm sure it's affected a number of us here, and it'd be interesting to hear from you guys as to what this looks like for your organisation, and if your leaders are aware of these kind of challenges in the workplace. The report went on to say that following their report in 2017, poor mental health now costs the UK employers £45 billion a year, which is up from 16% from 2017. And I'm sure that that's had an adverse impact since COVID-19 and lockdown. So I think it's really important that for lots of us maybe listening, at some point in our careers, we may have thought that tackling employees' mental health and well-being is somebody else's problem and another team's job. And you may be partly right in saying that, but I think it's really important that we focus on it together and help each other in addressing this. And whether you're at the start of your journey or you're already a mental health and awareness champion, hopefully you'll find this presentation helpful. So to look at this from a kind of TfL lens, and just to mention, I am, oh sorry Laura, just the slide before, just to mention that I don't claim to be a mental health and wellbeing specialist. I work in talent and acquisition and recruitment. But what I'd like to do in this short presentation is to set the scene and draw the link between the work that we do in talent acquisition and recruitment in relation to improving our wellbeing and mental health awareness through our brilliant hires. If I'm honest, I hadn't thought too much about this link before being asked to present at this event, and I really do hope that you're able to go away today with a bit more food for thought in the area that you can progress within your own organisations. So when I was thinking about mental health and TfL, I thought of it in kind of two parts. Employees, of which we have 28,000 employees that are spread across our operational workforce and our kind of office staff and corporate employees, and also our millions of customers to consider each day. Pre-COVID, we don't have quite that many customers at the minute, but we are welcoming customers back onto our services. So very briefly, before we go into the success of a team, just wanted to give a bit more detail around some initiatives that TfL have introduced. And For those of you that live, work, or have ever visited London, you might not consider travelling around the city to be the most calming and serene experience. But it is TfL's vision to transform the way that we travel around our city, and we are investing billions of pounds into transforming the capital's transport system. One of the Mayor's initiatives and visions, which was detailed in his transport strategy released in 2017, is that he wants 80% of journeys to be made by public transport, walking or cycling by 2041. And hopefully you'll have all heard of the brilliant app called Headspace. TfL actually partnered with Headspace a couple of years ago and really wanted to try and make journeys more mindful, and have actually introduced a couple of wellbeing mindfulness guided walks. So the next time you're out and about and you want something different to listen to, check it out and let us know what you think. So you're probably thinking, how does this all fit into leadership hiring? Well, the TfL TA and executive recruitment team have had a razor focus on hiring diverse leadership since the team's creation over 5 years ago now. And we focus both on internal and external recruitment for the top 2% of TfL, and work across professional services functions like finance, HR and commercial, and also across our operating functions such as engineering, major projects and the London Underground. And it may not surprise you to hear that within the transport industry, the majority of leaders in leadership positions are male, and historically movement has been within the transport sector. We should hopefully also all know that there's lots of research out there that shows that diverse teams are able to solve problems quicker, and they outperform non-diverse teams by 87% of the time. So in 2019-20, last year, the team made a diverse leadership hire every 9 days and achieved 51% total diversity across our hires that year. We also had a record-breaking year in 2017-18, where 56% of our hires were female. And when we're talking about diversity within our team, we don't just mean protected characteristics, gender, ethnicity. We mean diversity of thought, and how we've achieved such great results and leadership hires is through using our award-winning 3 C's approach, which is core, close and creative. So just to give some examples, core would be looking at those candidates from transport sectors such as train operating companies. Close would be all industries like aviation, airlines, utilities and potentially oil and gas. And creative would be industries such as retail. And actually we've made some great hires recently from Coca-Cola and M&S. So including the external hires that our team work really hard to fill, we actually hire 50% internals as well. So the team work really hard collaborating with the staff network groups, particularly the race staff network group and the women's staff network group, in hosting development sessions and career talks for our employees across the ops side and office staff too, and work really hard on pipeline and senior management to make sure that we have a strong internal pipeline for our roles too. Alongside this, we try and get creative and host a number of internal and external events. We've recently, before COVID, hosted a speed networking event aimed at external candidates, and over the last couple of years have introduced leadership spotlight events where our senior leaders talk about their roles in their area and the transformation that their teams are going through to try and encourage some movement across TfL. So at the end of last year, or actually it's probably about this time last year, we were tasked with filling a number of finance vacancies, and we extended an offer to Laura. So Laura joined us in March this year, literally just before we went into lockdown. So I'll hand over to Laura to talk to you about the journey that she's been on and the great work that she's done since joining us.
Thanks very much, Katie. So hello everyone, Laura McNeil. So yes, I joined TfL in March this year. I was in the office for 1 week before we went into lockdown. So a new role is challenging at any time, but if you put that together with lockdown, so not being in the office to meet and collaborate with people, and then the biggest financial crisis that certainly TfL has faced, and probably every organisation has faced ever, it's been quite a challenging journey. And I mean, my career history, it's quite diverse. I actually started out as a tax manager in PwC, working through the travel industry, then 5 years with Royal Mail, where I worked through the privatisation, and then ended up as the finance director for the central part of the business of Royal Mail. So my latest role as head of finance for London Underground CapEx and for engineering is another change again, and it's brilliant. It's a fantastic role, fantastic opportunity, but it's also you know a lot of things to get your head around. And so if you can imagine that in this time of financial crisis, where our revenues dropped around about 95%, finance was absolutely at the core of how we continue, you know, to keep the network operating through London. And we have me in my role, you know, hardly any experience in this industry, and working extremely hard with the whole of finance, you know, to try and make sure that we kind of get through this difficult financial period. And it was extremely challenging and demanding, especially the first few months. The finance teams were under a huge amount of pressure. There were demands and challenges and coming from all sorts of areas, because TfL is such a critical, you know, part of London's economy, and its infrastructure has to be kept going to enable people to kind of do the core jobs that need to be done and the key worker roles. And after kind of maybe 2 to 3 months in the role, what I was clear on is that the way that we were working was only sustainable for so long. I think you go into a kind of fight or flight type scenario where in a crisis, you know, you kind of give it everything you've got, you work the kind of hours that you wouldn't believe you would be working. Everyone's going kind of almost running on adrenaline to kind of get through this dreadful crisis. But what was really clear is that we couldn't continue to work like that, but there was nothing seeming to happen in terms of it wasn't stopping, there wasn't a clear end in sight. You know, when were things going to get different? And as part of my kind of just me, and certainly of my leadership, is that people and wellness are absolutely at the centre of it. If you don't get that right, then you know you may as well give up, because it's the people that make an organisation. And I strongly felt that if we weren't going to try and make it better for our people, then you know we would be losing people, our sickness would go through the roof. And in particular, I was very aware that mental health would be a big problem. And I still think that we have got a huge journey of mental health to come over the coming years, because of you know the pandemic, and most likely the increase in mental health problems that it's caused. I've personally suffered from mental health issues, you know, for the past 20 years actually, and thankfully I prioritize it. It's absolutely kind of one of the most important things I do, is I look after my mental health. And so throughout the pandemic I've actually been very strong and fine, but I'm aware very much how completely all-encompassing and you know just absolutely terrifying that mental health problems, anxieties, depression, how bad they can be. And so as much as I can within TfL and wider, I want to make sure that anything that we can do to try and prevent people getting into that sort of situation, anything at all I can do to support, you know, it would be my absolute priority to do. So when I kind of was starting to think, right, what can I do here? Everyone in the organisation was talking about wellness. Yep, we need to focus on wellness. We need to, you know, make a difference here. But the issue is that nobody knew what to do. You know, how do you improve wellness in a pandemic like this? When we've gone from a situation and it's just turned everything on its head. Everyone's working from home. There's no boundaries in terms of your work, your home. Children are at home. You have the pressures of, you know, homeschooling. I have a 5 and 6 year old, which has been challenging to say the least. You know, I have my children coming into rooms and meetings, and you know, it's just exhausting. And you know, I'm one of the fortunate ones that, as I say, I've got very positive mental health. I've been able to get some support with, you know, help with my children, and yeah, TFL have been brilliant too. But there's lots of people who are less fortunate, and I really thought, what can I do? What are the key issues that are actually addressing me, my team, and others in TFL that may start to make a difference? So myself and a number of our peers got together and said, right, actually, so let's actually take some action rather than just talking, and let's kind of actively endorse a number of things that we think will make a difference to our people. And so this is what we came up with, our 7 new ways of doing things around here. And this was specifically within London Underground, the CFO team. And the reason that we kind of started it there as well is that my experience of change is that if you want it to work, you can't go too big to start with. You've got to kind of get it in an area, get it right, and grow it. And so starting it within the LU CFO team, these are the key areas that we focused on. So first of all, holidays. It may seem it may just be common sense to a lot of people, but for other people, it might be, oh my God, we can't do that. We're not available for emails, calls, or anything work related while on leave. Throughout the pandemic, more than ever, people felt pressurized that because there was so much going on that they needed to be available during holidays. What we were saying as leaders was, no, we're not going to be available and you shouldn't be available. There's no more important time than there has ever been to have a proper break. We also recognise that actually, certainly myself and the vast majority of people I work with, we spend our life in meetings. So when do you actually do the work that you need to do? So we agreed as a team that we would focus on Wednesdays, and we would aim that we would have a meeting-free Wednesday afternoons after 2 p.m. and we would all commit to not putting meetings in their diary at that time. That's been brilliant. It's blocked out in my calendar, it's blocked out in kind of the wider team's calendar, and generally we just don't meet on a Wednesday afternoon now, apart from, of course, when it's a meeting from another department or something like that. But it has made a huge difference in terms of getting time back. Fridays, we were still getting, you know, asks and requests and the meetings at 5, at 6 o'clock on a Friday. And the thing is, when you're at home, you know, and that is your work, that is your home, it's more important than ever, just like on holidays, that there are boundaries between your work and your home life. And, you know, I really wanted, and my peers really wanted our people to embrace the weekends. And that meant not finishing a meeting at 6 o'clock and then still having a totally kind of mess of things to tidy up. So we aimed for people finishing their work calls and meetings by 3. And then if they've finished, great, log off, go ahead for the weekend. Or if not, they've got a bit of time to kind of properly prioritise, do a to-do list, whatever it is that will give them that kind of headspace comfort in terms of going into the weekend. Evenings, this was a big one for me because of my childcare commitments. I do kind of a reasonable amount of childcare during the day, so I would go into, so at night I would go start emailing all my team loads and loads of requests, and actually I didn't realise what I was doing, because they would just feel the pressure, you know, new boss, oh my God, Laura's emailing at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, we need to respond. And that wasn't at all my intention. So what we're trying to do is, if you want to work at night, of course, that's fine, but don't contact people, because that may be their kind of quiet, peaceful time. And so what I now do is I put all my emails onto a delay function, so that they send first thing in the morning or at a different time throughout the day the next day. Meetings, this is one everyone knows about, but it is as simple as, let's try and finish our meetings on time, and if you don't need to be there, let's not do it. So we're actively challenging each other in terms of, is it really a value meeting, and do we need as many people there? Final two, we can say no. So a big thing is challenging work if it's not actually adding value. One of the things that I like to do personally is that when somebody asks for a piece of work, I say I can do it, or, and my team will do it, but do you realise it will take this amount of hours work, this, and this, do you still want me to do it? And it drives an interesting conversation, because a lot of the time people are not aware of the actual work that sits behind a request. And finally, reducing our emails. So as a recent example, I came home from 2 weeks holiday, and I came home to my diary absolutely jam-packed, and I don't know how many hundreds of emails. Lots of them I just didn't need to be copied on. So what we're trying very hard to do is don't copy everyone unless really required, and or if somebody needs to know something, and also pick up the phone instead. It's generally a quicker answer. So to hopefully reduce the burden of emails in our inbox. So just to kind of sum up a little bit then, overall it's been amazing. This has been so well received, and people have really embraced it and said, oh my goodness, this is great. Is it really all right that we don't work on our holidays, or that, we block out times in our diary? I've got the kids for 2 hours an afternoon. Absolutely, we at TFL, that's what we want you to do. We have to be flexible to support each other, and the response has been fantastic. So thank you. Katie, back over to you.
Thanks, Laura. That was really great, and it's actually something we've embraced in my team as well. So we now have our own diversity and inclusion and talent wellbeing charter. So thank you very much. Just some final kind of tips that we would like to finish on, as the kind of theme running through this has been looking after your mental health and well-being and that of your colleagues and peers. There's a couple of things that you could probably do over the course of the next couple of weeks, which will have a really big impact. So you could channel your creative writing skills and write a blog post it on LinkedIn, post it on your internal comms channels, and focus it on mental health awareness, focus it on well-being, anything that you've introduced on flexible working. Make time for regular check-ins with your peers, colleagues and stakeholders. We've quite openly talked about mental health today, and I think it's really important to keep that conversation going. And finally, think about dropping a senior stakeholder in your organisation a note of thanks every now and again. Especially during COVID, all of our organisations have been massively affected, and our senior leadership team and their teams within have worked really hard to keep businesses going and keep smiles on people's faces. So it will brighten your day to send a note of thanks, and I'm sure it will brighten their day as well. So that brings our presentation to a close. Thank you so much for listening. It's been great speaking today, and if you'd like to connect or to continue the conversation, please do connect with Laura and I on LinkedIn. Thank you.